Fear Not, Episode 13. Hi, I'm Billy Atwell, and I believe that consistently facing your fears is the only way to realize your truest self and to make those confident choices that will help you to obtain your deepest held hopes and dreams. I have faith that this podcast series will show you that you are not alone, that it will strengthen you and give you courage to face your fears, and that it will help you to permanently cross over into a life of living beyond your fears. Join me on this journey as we listen and learn from others as they share their experiences in facing and overcoming their own fears. Hey everybody! Today you and I are going to be joined by Pati Palmer. Welcome, Pati. Are you ready to fear not today?
Sure am, Billy.
Pati Palmer has been teaching sewing for the past 37 years, and she's the driving force behind the Palmer Pledge Publishing Company and the creator of 8 Palmer Pledge Sewing Notion products, including Perfect Fuse interfacings. Since 1980, Pati has designed and written instructions for more than 220 patterns for the McCall Pattern Company, starting with the now infamous Pati Palmer Susan Pledge 8-hour blazer pattern that stunned the industry by selling 1 million copies the first year. Pati is the author or co-author of 10 sewing books, and editor and publisher of 20 more books, and 18 how-to videos. Her Real People series of books and DVDs have guided thousands of sewists around the world in acquiring perfectly fitted, self-made garments. Her Palmer Pledge sewing and fitting workshops in Washington, Oregon, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Connecticut are attended annually by international sewers from all walks of life. Pati, can you take a few minutes just to fill in the gaps and give us a brief glimpse of your personal life?
First of all, I want to say that one of my favorite things that I do is teach hands-on sewing workshops. And I have a number of other teachers that we've trained in the other locations, but it's probably the most gratifying thing that I do, because you really learn so much from people when you hear what their questions are, and can you make your instruction better because of the questions that you get asked. And everybody's so much fun. We have a ball. And I have been in Portland, Oregon for most of my adult career. And I'm married. I have a daughter who's just turned 30, and she is also dabbling in the home sewing industry as well as ready-to-wear and a few other things. But we're working together on some projects, some online classes, and she also designs for McCall's and has been for about 10 years now. And so that's just, every mother that's just a dream, I think. And I'm at a point in life where I am looking towards some kind of form of retirement and downsizing my life and my house and everything. And that is one of the biggest challenges that I've ever faced. And it's draining, especially when you're a collector. But I'm pretty good. I've been spending a few years already trying to figure out where things go, like my antique sewing machines and things that I've enjoyed living with as furniture or, just whatever. But you can't move into a smaller place and take it all with you.
Well, thank you for that glimpse. Can you tell us, Pati, what has been one of the biggest fears you've had to face or facing, and tell us what did you do to overcome it?
One of the things that I hadn't really thought about as being a fear, but it really was when my daughter was 14. My husband and I went to New York, and we got out of LaGuardia into a cab, and he had a heart attack and died in the cab. And we made it to a hospital, and I had to come home and tell my daughter, and that was a huge fear and very scary, but you have to face things like that sometime. And then knowing, how am I going to live, how am I going to be able to survive on, my income, and what am I going to do? Am I going to sell a house? That was the other time I was going to sell a house. And it was really hard. I mean, when I think about it, I don't know what I did to suppress the fear, but I spent a lot of time alone just going through things and trying to learn as much as I can and research what I needed to do and what were my options. So that was pretty scary. But right now, I think, you ask about fear, and I can't think of very many real fears I've had in my life. Except when my dad was driving on Mount Hood logging roads that he created, and the snow was covering up the road, and it was straight down on one side, I about died, but there's nothing I could do about that can't trust him. Well, he built the road. He must have known where it was, but you couldn't see it because the snow just went right over it.
That would be scary.
And I was young, I was probably 12 or something. So, but right now, I live in Portland, Oregon, and there's been a lot of research in the last 10 or 20 years on the fact that we will probably have an earthquake because of the Cascadia Fault. And so I read a book about it, and I thought, this is real. And I think that means that we all need to start preparing in case it happens. And part of sort of a funny thing about preparing, my design director said, you don't want to be the only one on the block that has 5 gallons of water in your in storage, or have freeze-dried or otherwise kind of food that you could eat for 2 weeks to 3 months. Because if your neighbors aren't prepared, that's going to affect you too. So I've been sending out emails to my neighbors telling them they better start collecting food and water. But the fear about this for me was, okay, what are the possible scenarios? Well, one of them is that your house can fall off of its foundation, and no matter how sturdy your house is, if it fell off the foundation, then it probably was gone. So I researched seismic reinforcement, and we had a company come in and retrofit, and they studied in San Francisco, so I think it felt like they knew what they were doing. And then now we're working on the preparedness, and we would like to sell the house in the near future, but we can't really do it right now. So I researched again and said, well, what about earthquake insurance? And I found out everything you'd ever want to know about earthquake insurance, and whether you should try to afford it or not, because it is expensive. And I think we've decided that we're going to, for at least another year or two that we're here, just to protect our investment. And we also, in researching it, found that if you go cheap on the insurance, your deductible's so high you might as well not have it. If you spend $2,000 or $3,000 more, then you might have $150,000 deductible, and you could probably survive. And if it was worse, you'd have coverage. So that was sort of an interesting thing to me. So I think a lot of times I think that you really just need to look at all of the options and the possible consequences of something in order to make it through the fear that you might have.
And do you have a daily practice or a habit that you've developed that helps you to stay out of fear? Other than this, in addition to analyzing risks?
I think that I've always been a risk taker. I don't know why, but I think my risks are pretty calculated risks. And that's because I know a lot about the things that I've taken risks in. So to me, in a way, it is a risk, but it's not as much of a risk as if somebody that didn't know, say, the sewing industry, which is where I've taken a lot of risks. It might be a huge risk if you didn't know more about it. So in order to assess a risk, I've always asked myself, okay, what's the worst case scenario if I failed? What would happen? And can I accept the worst thing that could happen? And if I say I can accept it, accept that risk, and accept the failure, then I feel like I can take the risk and have no fear. And it's sort of, you always have a little bit of question, but fear is, I think, when you really aren't sure that you should take that risk. But if you think it through, for example, I published my first sewing book, or actually second, with Susan Pletch, my former partner, and I had been sewing on Ultra Suede. I was probably sewed on it before Halston, first one in the world probably, and it was because I was at a department store and they gave me some of the fabric. Well, I did seminars on it, and Susan Pletch, who I'd worked with another company, she came to Portland for a show, and she said, Patty, why don't you write a book on Ultra Suede? You know everything about it. You've been sewing it for several years. And I said, I don't have time. And she said, well, I'll write it. she had never sewn on ultra suede, so she got fabric and made a coat and wrote through, the book and did the first draft, and then came and we worked on it together. So when we were ready to publish the book, we had no money to pay for the printing, but we decided we had to market it. So we ran a half-page ad in Vogue Pattern magazine, and I think I was thinking 500, but I think it was actually $1,500. And that was a big risk, but I don't know. I never felt fear from it. And so Susie, who was in San Jose at the time, she got a post office box, and she said, well, I'll handle the orders because you're still working full-time in Portland. So she went to the post office box after the ad ran, and there was nothing in the box. It was empty. And she's going, oh, my. But the postmaster called her over and said, here, I have something for you. And he gave her a huge mail bag full of orders. And so the ad paid for itself, and it paid for the printing of the book. Successes happen. Sometimes I think I've had 3 big successes, and they've all been because of timing. And if you're early on a trend, you have a much better chance of being successful than if you're, down the line. Like we just published a book on sewing knits, and it wasn't the first one. It's done well, but nothing like that little ultra suede book, which sold close to 1 million copies also in its lifetime.
Could you share with us a resource that you've come across that might help us in overcoming our own fears?
Well, the internet. I mean, you can overcome a fear with knowledge, right? And
True,
I
true.
mean, I had I had a case of vertigo. I've never had it my entire life. I was supposed to get on a plane that morning and go to Denver and film this online class for Craftsy.com, and my head was just spinning, and I got sick and everything. And I'm like, well, I guess I can't go. I called the airlines and said, well, I'll take a later flight. I kept calling them back, take a later flight. Well, I got my iPad out and laid it beside me on the bed and started looking up dizziness and everything. And finally, after spending a couple hours, vertigo seemed like it was. I mean, like that's what I had. And so then it told you a maneuver that you could do to shake the particles in your ear loose, little calcium deposits, and so it would go away. So I did the maneuver, and it went away. But I was really afraid at first that I might have a brain tumor or something, But doing the research and gaining knowledge, and you have to really, on the internet, you have to read more than one article. You have to do a lot of research and read a lot of things, but you can come to conclusions that can help you reduce fear.
Are you ready for the speed run?
Okay.
What individual, fiction or real, has made the most impact on your life?
I think in general, the people that raised you are probably the ones that helped create you one way or another. My parents had a really strong work ethic, and I think that rubbed off. But they also didn't get along very well, so that rubbed off too. And so I wasn't going to get married until I was able to take care of myself in the way that I wanted to become accustomed to, so that when he left me, I would be okay. So I got married at 31. But anyway, the person that I've been influenced for about 27 years by Eleanor Roosevelt, and basically it's because the house that I moved into 27 years ago, she had come here several times and stayed because she and the owner of this house had been in Congress together in the 30s. I mean, she was First Lady, but this gal was in Congress. And so I just got real interest in her, and I read a couple books. I think Blanche Cook Wiesen or something like that wrote 2 volumes on Eleanor, and that was my introduction to her life. But recently, one of my sewing workshop ladies brought me a gift of an old autobiography that Eleanor wrote herself, and that was really my favorite. And I didn't realize what an amazing influence she was in her day on everything around the world. I mean, just an amazing role model.
If you could instantly change one thing in the world, what would that be?
Well, I'd say eliminate hate. I don't know how you do that, but wouldn't it be wonderful? There's so many hateful people out there right now doing really incredibly bad things. And it just makes me always wonder why.
What's your biggest weakness?
Some people might say pleasing people, because I've always been a pleaser, but I don't know that that's a weakness.
What's your biggest strength?
I am very I can't think of the word right now. When you get into a project and you just don't stop until it's done. I'm driven to. I can take tedious things and get so into them I can stick to them. Well, and when you're writing a technical book, which I've done many, the best way to do it is to get in and stay with it, because it'll be better than if you come in and out of the project. And you can't just sit down and write a book, so of course you collect all the information, but when you start putting everything together and doing your best writing and your best illustration and leading people through, you have to motivate before you can teach, because people have to want to learn what you're teaching. And I think I was state debate champion of Montana when I was a senior in high school. And I think that's where I learned a lot of this, because it was tedious research and it was convincing the judges on a topic, but the topic could be, you have to be for it or against it. You have to be able to convince both. And debate is research and then speaking. And I think that's why I have been a public speaker and an author and editor, is because of the training I got in debate. It was great. It's too bad there isn't more debate in high schools today. There's still some, which is great.
Do you have a favorite sound?
A beautiful voice like yours. You ought to do voiceovers. Well, my mom tried to play the violin, and they didn't have enough money to buy a violin, so she had to give up the lessons. And that was sad, because all of her life she always, sort of felt like she'd missed something because she didn't have the money to buy a violin. And I think it's a beautiful instrument. I can't play any instruments, so I think anybody that can is amazing. Yeah, but it's a very pretty sound.
And do you have any parting advice for us today?
Well, I think if it's about handling fear, I think that what I would say is do these couple of things that I've been talking about. Be informed. No matter what your fear is, go find out more information about everything that creates that fear, and you will be better from that. And then also do a risk assessment to decide if the fear is something that you have because you can't or can live with the consequences of what you do. And I've related that to risk, but maybe it has a broader meaning.
Well, thank you for that. And I want to thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really great. I've had a great time talking to you today, and I've definitely learned a lot.
Well, thank you, Billy, and I've enjoyed talking to you, and thanks for doing this project, because I think it could be valuable to a lot of people.
Thank you for joining me today. And remember, you cannot achieve everything, but you do have the God-given ability to achieve anything. So stay focused, out of fear, and keep on keeping on. Until next time, be well and peaceful. For more information on today's episode and guest, or for resources that will assist you in overcoming your fears, visit livingbeyondyourfears.com. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast, where 3 times a week we move to a life beyond our fears.